Welcome back to the Evergreen Report, the show where we take a look at what's really going on in Olympia and how it's hitting your wallet. Today, we're tackling the biggest elephant in the Capitol building: education and the budget. We'll follow the billions flowing into the public instruction, student loans, transportation, and programs you probably never heard of, but that you and I are definitely paying for. I'm your host, Jay, and let's jump into the Evergreen Report. So, you guys may have noticed last week I was on a bit of a hiatus. I was thinking, what do I want to do next? What direction do I want to go with the podcast? What do the people want to know? What would I want to know if I was the average Washingtonian? I go through Twitter, I see all these great things happening. I put an episode out last Friday, just more of a brain dump, if you will. And I was like, I don't know what to do next. Do I want to go through all the bills that have been signed into law and that are being signed? There's like almost 100 of them, and lots of them are controversial. Lots of them have an emergency clause. Lots of them are ideological based. Some of them are bipartisan. Surprises me. But I figured we talk about the biggest elephant in the room first: the budget. Democrats put together this budget, $78 billion or something, which included $9.5 billion in new taxes. We're in a $15 billion budget hole, apparently. It's what they tell us, right? And so they're like, okay, let's put together this budget. Let's wait until the very, very end of the session, right before the buzzer. Here's this budget, $78 million budget for the next 2 years, operating budget for fiscal year 25 through 27. And let's put in $9.5 billion in new taxes. And then clock out, go home for the session. That's it. That's what they did. And you should be pretty upset that they waited to the very last moment. They didn't care about what you and I said. You didn't care about us putting our voices on these different bills: 49, rent control, property tax increases, yada, yada, yada. We'll break down a bunch of these today, and over the next few episodes. We're actually doing a 5-part series on the budget. But you should be pretty upset about all these new taxes. $9.5 billion in new taxes. Education, transportation, ideological items, and 1,366 pages. The Republicans didn't even have a chance to look through this, challenge it. There's no time. It's so long that what are they going to do with it? How is anyone going to look through it? And now Governor Ferguson's office has said, well, it's going to take a couple weeks for the governor to review this. Governor himself said, I'm going to take this really slow, line by line, make sure I agree with everything, strike things if I need to, which could lead to a special session to be called. But we'll see. I don't know. We'll see what happens as he continues to look through the budget. But you all of us, should be rather upset that they just decided, you know what, this budget, 1,300 pages, take it or leave it, we're going home. $9.5 billion in new taxes. Sucks to be you, Washington. Sucks to be you. And the best part is, listen to this. Listen to this. And I'll stop my little opening monologue here and jump into the actual education side of it, because there's just so much to get into when it comes to this budget. And the taxes and the extreme taxation and just all the different elements in between. There's so much. A couple quotes from the floor themselves. It's a privilege to pay taxes. Senate Democrat on the floor of the Senate. It's a privilege for us to pay taxes. Oh, how lovely. We're so privileged to pay $9.3 billion in new taxes for our state. $9.3 billion in the state. Isn't that a lot? But it's our privilege. And it only benefits the ultra rich if our taxes are low. I can't make any sense of this. Regardless, we're jumping into a 5-part series that I'm just going to call Budget Breakdown. What else do you call it? First episode, Billions into the Books. Education spending and the taxpayer tab. Because don't worry, you are picking up the tab on all these taxes and all these budget items. They got to be funded from somewhere. They're funded by you and I. That $78 billion, where does it come from? Well, it comes from you and I. It comes from the taxes that we pay: the property taxes, the sales tax, the gas tax, the Zin tax, the Tesla tax, the fund tax, the Discovery Pass tax going up, the official license tax going up. All these taxes that they seem to nickel and dime us for. That's where it all goes. So this is what we're looking at here. So when it comes to just education-specific taxes, there's no brand new education-specific taxes. Of course, to continue heavy reliance on existing property tax and sales tax to fund rising costs, teacher salaries, transportation, OSPI administration. There's The increased dependence on the B&O tax surcharge. Sorry about my little chihuahua barking there. He likes to think he's a little guard dog, and he's rather distracting at times. Of course, the increased dependence on the B&O tax surcharge, which is paid by high-grossing businesses to fund student financial aid via the Workforce Education Investment Account, the WEIA. And of course, the education spending increases may indirectly drive up school levies, that's what they rely on, and bond requests, which lead to higher property taxes at the district level. So it all comes back down to your property taxes at the end of it. So the total education budget, K through 12 plus higher ed, Washington is spending over 29 billion on K through 12 education in the 25 through 27 budget cycle. That includes 1.7 billion for pupil transportation, which is approximately they're allocating, 856 billion, 868 billion. So this is across the next 2 years. 1.7 billion for transportation. This funds transportation of eligible students under the RCW 28A.160.192. 10 million per year is for an alternate funding grant program based on district efficiency and geographic needs. And then 939,000 of this per year for regional transportation coordinators. And then reimbursement for bus purchases only if they meet competitive price standards. Funding is also available for summer skills center transportation. The impacts on taxpayers. Well, this is funded entirely by the general funds. State, meaning sales tax and property tax revenues, are supporting this. Any growth in this line item directly pressures other state services or leads to higher tax needs. So this is just the transportation budget. Getting kids to and from school, pretty simple. We all should be pretty okay with this. But of course, those transportation costs go up as the price for fuel goes up. So those two things are directly tied in here. So think about that. But we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about the transportation here on an upcoming episode. Seattle Public Schools and others have reported rising transportation costs, particularly due to inflation and fuel increases. Recently talked to Gabe Galbraith, the Kennewick School District. He said the operating costs, the transportation costs, are one of the highest line items on the school district budget year over year, and it's really impactful because of the fuel prices is going up and up and up and up. 1.25 billion in financial aid and scholarships administered by the Student Achievement Council. Breakdown $575 per year for FAFSA state aid application outreach. $850,000 per year for apprenticeship support for Washington College grants. 1.4 million for the students experiencing homelessness program. 10 million for loan forgiveness and scholarship expansion in healthcare field. 5.2 million for $500 annual bridge grant for low income students, and 500,000 for new mentoring scholarship program as well. That's a new one. For a new mentoring scholarship program. 500,000 for that. Some elements of this that could be seen as controversial, depending on what side of the aisle you lay on here. This is a budget. It's hard to get controversial on the budget. Hard to get line by line item. What's controversial, what's not. So we're not going to try to go to pick a side here. Play a side. You decide where you're at on each of these. Prioritization of dual language educators for loan forgiveness. Cultural and racial equity focused outreach language embedded in aid programs. Use of taxpayer dollars for texting campaigns, social media outreach, and financial aid nudges. So, the social media, that should come from somewhere else. That should come from within the budget. I don't see that as a big need for texting campaigns, social media outreach, things like that. I think districts need to figure that part out. Taxpayer impact. These costs are split between the general fund and the Workforce Education Investment Account, which is funded by the B&O tax surcharge on high grossing companies. Businesses often pass these costs to consumers, which means price increases in healthcare, software, and services are likely. So think of like Microsoft, Amazon, and think of those two biggest ones, right, that we have in our state. Think about your Xbox Pass that they see, right? Well, since they're having to pay more taxes here in the state, the likelihood that they raise, like your Xbox One Pass or the price of video games that are for the Xbox One or whatever, those things could go up. That's where you're going to feel these taxes, and just in the fund, because they're going to have to pay these taxes somewhere, and they're going to have to come from you and I, the things that we enjoy. 74.6 million for OSPE-based operations. So what does this mean? So this is what I wanted to figure out, because in fiscal year 2024, 22.3 million. In this fiscal year 25, 23.3 million. The remaining funds are for additional programs and administrative functions for OSPE. Salaries, research staff, oversight, policy, reporting, award programs, civics awards, and tracking of world language proficiency, producing implementation reports of previous legislative budget provisions. Personally feel like the OSPE office doesn't need $274.6 million for base operations. Maybe that's just me, but I don't think Chris Recto's office needs $274.6 million. because I still can't find. I search and I search and I search and I don't know where all this money goes for. Obviously, salaries, research, oversight, policy reporting, award programs, but what else is it for? While administrative in nature, the spending reflects government overhead. No direct benefits to students, raising questions about bureaucratic bloat. So, again, what is the $275 million? Round up here, round numbers are easier. Where is it going? What's it for? That's my question, because it has no benefit to students and it just looks like bloated. It looks bloated because in fiscal year 25, the last 2 years, the budget's been around 22.3 million and 23.3 million. So where is the other $250 million going in this budget here? 8.2 billion on teacher salaries and compensation adjustment. So this is up. So 593 million in 2026 and then 738.7 million in 2027. Total for 2 years, just in new raises is 1.33 billion. This includes a 2.5% salary increase in 2025 to 2026, and then a 2.6 salary increase in 2026 to 2027. So a little bit of a raise there, and then funding for 3 professional learning days per year, including mandatory training in DEI for 1 day a year. While this is very controversial, because I'm pretty sure there was an executive order that was given down by the President of the United States, federal law, Trump state law, as I think we all know, we learned that in civics back in high school. This is a unneeded training, essentially. It's a waste of money. Like, why? Why? What are the other 2 professional days? So DEI, there's a DEI conference as well that Governor Ferguson announced. Where does this money come from? It comes from these budgets. It comes from this money. I don't see why this is needed at all. Because I mean, teachers, let's let them have a day off. Just give them the day off. They don't need all these professional days, things like that. Just let them go. Let them go have a day off. State-funded DEI training is politically divisive. Raises are mandated regardless of student performance or budget constraints. Pressure from teacher union leaders to structural inflation in education spending. So these raises, 2.5%, that's about a salary, that's about an inflation adjusted increase there. So these got to come despite the budget constraint. Our teachers still are underpaid at the end of it, and it's still difficult for them to live their lives. So the biggest here is the largest driver of education growth costs. If your school district asks for a local levy or bond, this is why, because they're having to pay for DEI training, three trainings a year. The state doesn't give them this, or they're having to pay these teacher salary increases, which the state doesn't necessarily always give. Families may see this in reflected in higher property taxes, especially where state match funding is required. So there's different areas of the state, different counties where that state match funding is absolutely required. So this kind of depends on your local area. If you're in one of these areas, I would love to just hear from you, not necessarily have you on the podcast, but just to hear from you. I think it would be really cool to kind of understand how that affects your day to day. And then we're going to take a quick little sip. Lots of numbers here. So before I get into the last big area of the budget here and what we're getting into is I do just want to shout out this series sponsor of the podcast is actually For Fathers Apparel. This polo actually can't get anymore. This was a movie night one, but if you look very closely, you see all different movie characters, things like that. Movie night, a really great polos by Four Fathers Apparel. They just dropped their gender reveal collection out on their website, shopforfathers.com. That's shopforefathers.com. You can use the code YOUNGDAD at checkout. You'll save some money there. So enough of that. 3.3 billion for special education, bilingual institutional, and assistant program. Whew, that's a mouthful. What it covers: special education adjustments, 3.5 million in 2026 and 7.2 million in 2027, tied to Senate Bill 5263. Funding allocation changes tied to general appointment rules, bilingual education, institutional schools, safety net funding, and program evaluation. So that's where the money goes. That's what this money's covering. Just the special education side of it. Well, it's interesting to note that here in Kennewick, at least where I live, school district, the special education enrollment's actually down, which is surprising. I mean, that is because they have changed how kids are enrolled in special education. You see that across the state, so that the districts aren't having to enroll as many kids that may not necessarily need the special education into special education. The points here, the fiscal points here, is increase in funding often tied to compliance with federal mandates. Some bills focus on lowering capital special education enrollment eligibility for more districts to receive funding. Critics argue that too many new rules make the program bloated and difficult to measure. Again, that's kind of exactly where we're at, is that it is hard to measure exactly where this money is going, what's it for, is it bloated, why do we need all this money? And that's one thing we should always ask. We should always ask, where does this money go? Why does it need so much? And what exactly is it funding? And even those answers are hard to find in this big budget. There's some historical context here, of course. Despite a nearly 50% increase in state education spending over the past decade, test scores have stagnated or declined in math and reading since the pandemic. Our scores have had a massive decrease in our state when it comes to our students and how they're actually performing. Yet this big increase in spending is the two don't match at all. You think if you're spending more, you should get better results because you're giving a better education, but then you see 275 million going to OSPI just for administrative stuff. What? But it has no benefits to students. So where's this money really going? How is it actually being spent? And why do they need it? Why do they need it? So what are you actually paying for? How is this actually going to affect you day to day? Well, there's three areas that I really want to jump into here. So property taxes. Local districts rely heavily on levies. When state budgets balloon, so do levy needs. Many districts are requesting a new or continued levies to supplement state funds. And this is exactly where we're seeing. If you look at Findlay School District here within the Tri-Cities area, you will see that they barely passed a new levy. Without this levy that they would have gotten and that passed, luckily, they would have been looking at a 4-day school week, a massive decrease in staff, and then cutting sports and other extracurriculars for their students without that increase. So it's pretty crazy what actually happens when these levies don't pass. But it did pass nonetheless, so good thing there. It goes to show that people, they don't necessarily always want to pay these things because your property tax bill could increase anywhere from $300 to $800, depending on your district, depending on where you live in the state. Could be more, could be less, depending on your property value, of course, your taxes that you pay. And of course, sales and fuel taxes, as general fund dollars are diverted into education programs, other costs are offset by cap and trade and climate auction revenues, raising gas prices by 20 cents to 50 cents a gallon when we already have massive increases in gas tax coming. We're going to break that down again later. Cannabis tax dollars are being redirected into education. 1.3 million this cycle was redirected into education. New fees and tuition hikes. Washington public colleges are expected to increase tuition 2 to 4% annually, despite massive state investment. So, despite all this money going into our state schools, Wazoo, UW, SPU, and all the other colleges, they're still expected to increase tuition 2 to 4% annually, regardless. But regardless of all the money that's being spent, there's some money that we need to look at and say, what is this? What is this going to? Why do we need it? And some controversial line items here. And there will be in every budget that could be raising your eyebrows because we're still paying for it. $500,000 to study opportunity gaps for Asian American and Pacific Islander students, funding separate contractors to conduct race-based educational outcome analyses. Do we need it? I don't know. You be the judge. 276 million annually for Washington College grants, no longer based strictly on merit or academic performance, but more income eligibility. So these grants aren't just going because they're merit based, they're earned. It's just because of what income bracket you're coming from, which could be good. It creates more opportunity, but at the same time, $276 million going for these grants. $1.165 million per year for incarcerated student grants. This is Senate Bill 5953, offering college aid to prisoners. Take it for what you will. Everyone has a different take. I think, yes, there needs to be rehabilitation in our prisoners, in our prisons, to allow for them to get a start on the outside world as they transition out of prison and have an opportunity at a normal life like you and me. If they did the crime for their time and they're rehabilitated and they actually go through a proper process to get out of jail. I don't see a big issue with this. Performance-based reporting requirements that emphasize race and language over test scores and academic growth. You see that throughout this education budget here. The education part of the budget is that there's a lot of race, language over test scores and academic growth. It's not really merit-based. We see less and less merit-based and earning these based on academic performance, but more so income eligibility, race, language, ethnicity, how you identify. We see that more and more and more throughout these different education bills, and we see it plenty. I mean, go and look at House Bill or Senate Bill, yeah, House Bill 1696, the Reparations Act, basically for African American homeowners. We see it going to reverse racism, and we see it going to marginalized groups that maybe aren't even as marginalized as they seem. Some are 100%, but maybe they're not. And so we see it going to people who aren't earning it versus those who are earning it, that do really need it, that are actually out there hustling to try to make a better life. They don't get it because they don't meet a certain criteria for the grant or for the loans or for whatever else it is here. So just something to think about. No salary increases for substitute teachers, even as permanent staff receive full cost of living bump. So substitute teachers, they some of them become long-term subs. Some of them end up subbing so much because there's always teachers out every single day that they're so needed. Heck, there's even shortages of subs, but they're not getting any cost of living bump for their day-to-day work that they're doing with the school. So that's a little disappointing because they're still working hard and they're there to fill a gap anyways. So they should be paid accordingly to help fill them. And so there's some other news outlets that are covering this. Seattle Times, Washington test scores remain below pre-pandemic levels despite billions in new funding from the Seattle Times. King 5, state education budget includes funds for new social equity studies. And then Tri-City Herald, Pasco, Richland, school districts request levy renewals to cover salary. So these three go to show that our test scores are still down below pre-pandemic levels, but our funding is way up. Despite billions of dollars in new funding, our scores are still down. They're still in the toilet. They're still so bad. Pasco, Richland, Finley, they need these levies renewed to cover salaries, just to cover teacher salaries. I mean, Richland already cut nurses and librarians from the budget to be able to find some extra money there that maybe wasn't needed. I don't know if I should mention this, but I reached out to the Richland School Board president. I won't say her name. You can look that up. I asked her to come on the podcast. She said, "Great, I would love to see what you talked about with Gabe," and sent her that. No problem. Well, we shared our own personal opinions. And she said, "Because of your opinion, I'm not going to be able to do the podcast." Like, what? Really? You don't want to speak up for why you're cutting nurses? Why you're cutting librarians? What the community can do to help you out? Possibly? How we can better help with education in our local area? Like, seriously? You don't want to do it? Because you're afraid that I might ask you about, Title IX or boys and girls spaces or any of those? When I won't. Clearly very respectful of my guests. I mean, Gabe and I, we met before and we talked like, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking of talking about. Are you okay with it? Only because the Kennewick School District did go out of their way and file a Title IX request to the federal government, and then we talked about that beyond. Let's see. So I had said back after she had declined, I appreciate the thoughtful she said. Thank you so much for your kind invitation to be a guest on your podcast. I appreciate the time and effort you put into creating conversations around important topics in our community. As president of the school board, I serve as a spokesperson for the board made up of individuals with a diverse spectrum of political perspectives. In this role, I believe it's important that I remain neutral and nonpartisan when representing the board publicly, even if there is a disclaimer that I am offering my own opinions and not those of the board. In your episode with Gabe, your dialogue makes it obvious you have polarized opinions on controversial topics. For that reason, I will need to respectfully decline the invitation at this time. I truly appreciate your understanding, and I wish you continued success with your podcast. Warm regard. But then I just asked her, this was back on April 25th, so I haven't heard back, hoping to. I said, I do have strong opinions on the issues Gabe and I discussed. However, these are pre-aligned topics and agreed on. Much for every individual I've ever interviewed on either this podcast or my other podcast, Young Dad Pod, I'm always open for discussion and new opinions. I also am highly respectful of my guests. No two guests are the same. I ask for a simple chance. I would love to have a specific conversation with you about the vision, new high school, student achievement, and what barriers of success the district is having. What do you need from your community? Additionally, as I said some personal things here, this information would be very important. So it's just rather disappointing when someone that's elected to this public office to represent doesn't want to speak to the public, doesn't want to speak to a resident, because that's their whole job. We should be able to ask them questions. They shouldn't be declining. They should be saying, "Yeah, sure, come on, talk about whatever you want. I'll speak up for my district. I'll speak up for myself. I'll represent. No problem, no issue." So it's rather disappointing when they say, "No, I'm going to decline because it's too polarizing." But yet the people that would be listening to this in your local area want to hear from you. Parents that don't always get to attend school board meetings, that don't have time to attend, they want to hear from you. And so it's essential that we hear from them, because we are doubling down on student support without the evidence that it's working. We're building schools, we're funding these programs, new curriculum, things like that, and we're doing it with the taxpayer money. You're doing it with our local levies. You're doing it with community support, whether they support it or not. Enough people show up at the ballot to support it and it passes, and then it affects everybody else who, for better or worse, didn't show up and support it. So it's just interesting that I just want to leave you with that thought, because education, it is essential. But how much of this money is actually making it to the classroom? I would say not nearly enough. And I think most would agree with that. We see these tiny classrooms packed with students, these teachers who are overwhelmed to where they can't even get through a day because kids are yelling chicken jockey and skibbity all day long, and they can't even teach a lesson fully. A lot of it is also tied up in ideology, admin, or political pet projects. How much of it, though, is tied up in those things? We don't know. It's hard to find out. When the dollars don't track with the results, it's fair to ask, are we funding outcomes or just optics? Look at this Pasco school district. That's the school board. Not Richland. Not Richland, sorry. Pasco was the one I was talking about. You could do it for optics, but why can't you speak to the outcomes of what is going on in Pasco at the school board level? I mean, I'll talk to a superintendent. I'll talk to vice president of the board. I'll talk to whoever. I don't care. If it's not you, you're too afraid. You are too worried about being nonpartisan, things like that, then, that's fine. We'll be nonpartisan. Heck, I think I did a pretty good job on this episode being less nonpartisan than normal. And, it just goes to show, are we funding outcomes or just optics? Is this new high school in Pasco, is it just for optics or is it for outcomes? And what are those planned outcomes going to be? I don't know. I can't get the answer. I would love to get the answer, but I can't. So if she hears this, you're invited to come back onto the podcast, and to rethink, reconsider. Or anyone from the Pasco School Board that hears this, you're more than invited to come back on. If any of this doesn't sit right with you, the $275 million for the OSPE office, $8.2 billion in teacher salaries, $3.3 billion for SPED, or no raises for substitute teachers, or $1.25 billion for student financial aid and scholarships, or $1.7 billion for transportation, or this massive increase we've had since COVID, but the scores go down and it doesn't add up, and our eighth graders, seventh to eighth graders are still at like a fourth, fifth grade reading level. These things don't add up. They don't make sense to you, or they just don't sit right with you. Call your local legislature. Message them. Go and find a bill. Go and find their contact information. It's all public information. Go and tag them on X, Instagram, message them wherever you can find them. Talk to them. Ask them, hey, these things don't sit right with me. What's really going on? Or if you're in a blue area, you're hearing this throughout the state, think, hey, what's up with that budget? Why? Why these billions upon billions of dollars? More than a third, 29 billion of 78 billion. 37% of the budget goes to education. 37% of the budget goes to education. So more than a third here. If it doesn't sit right with you, or if you're confused, you're scratching your head, like, where's all this money going? What's it for if our scores aren't going up and our students are doing worse? There's more teen crime than ever. There's more teens doing drugs. There's more problems with our students than ever. If you're just like, this doesn't make sense, these numbers don't add up, why does OSPE need 200? That's my biggest question. Why does OSPE need $275 million? For what? For base operations. What are base operations? This doesn't sound like it's going to anything. It's not helping our students, and why do they need it? Keep it for the salaries, keep the bare minimum. The rest needs to go into the classroom. The rest needs to actually make it to our schools. Our schools shouldn't have to be going out constantly, begging down to the wire. If we don't get this levy, we're going to a 4-day school week. And we don't have any childcare to cover you. And we don't have this, and we don't have this, and we won't have sports, and we don't have extracurriculars. So we're really sorry. That's what's happening in more rural areas than you think in the state, not just Finley. So Continue to ask how much of your tax money is actually going towards teaching and how much is being lost to layers of bureaucracy and unproven programs. And that's been all a budget breakdown part one here on the Evergreen Report. I'm your host, Jay. Continue to ask these questions, continue to stay curious, and until next time, I'll see you right back here on the Evergreen Report.